To understand why Turkey's recent parliamentary elections were so significant, you need to know two numbers and one man. The two numbers come from the Turkish Electoral Commission's report on June 7th with the results of the parliamentary elections. The numbers are 12% and 40%. 12% is the portion of the vote won by the People's Democratic Party, or the HDP. This party is primarily Kurdish, so its 12% victory represents the first time that this Turkish minority has legal presence as a formal bloc in the country's legislature. And even though that 12% may not sound like a lot, many political analysts credit it with being enough to drop the Justice and Development Party, or AKP, to just 40%, which means that for the first time in more than a decade, they do not enjoy single-party rule over Turkey. Single-party rule that one man, President Tayyip Erdogan, was looking very much forward to. The current president and former prime minister of Turkey, Erdogan, has been seeking to have single-party rule so that his party can reassess the country's admittedly broken constitution. However, the president is a role that is usually just a political figure. With the constitutional revisions that Erdogan has planned, he wanted to transfer powerful executive abilities to the presidency. He was very powerful campaigning in the Turkish parliamentary elections, even though he wasn't even on the ballot. And so, what voters started to hear was less of matters about fixing the country's broken constitution and more of what sounded like an Erdogan-style dictatorship. And so, they handed the AKP an embarrassing loss. Even though the party is still the biggest party in the parliament, it no longer has the single-party majority it was looking forward to, and Erdogan is particularly disappointed by this. It leaves a pressing question. Aside from President Tayyip Erdogan, who are the biggest losers of the Turkish parliamentary elections? Because even though many are claiming that this was a win for Turkish democracy, its political reverberations have yet to be seen. Here are my top three. The third least affected winner is a man named Ahmet Davutoglu, for whom there was no foreseeable victory in early June. Davutoglu is the prime minister of Turkey and also belongs to Erdogan's AKP party. However, relations between Davutoglu and Erdogan haven't been their strongest. An April 7th report from the Council on Foreign Relations takes us back to the 2011 general elections, when Erdogan became president and Davutoglu became the prime minister. Davutoglu was a very much unknown name to international politics before that point. Many of his peers regard him as being a very bookish man, a smart, intelligent, and focused policymaker, but not a very adept politician. He lacks Erdogan's cunning ability to get himself out of practically any difficult situation. And this is precisely why Erdogan practically hand-picked Davutoglu for the position, because he was planning to transfer the powers of prime ministership towards the presidency. This has created a conflict between the two, and in the past April, Davutoglu began a search for corruption throughout the entire country. This was a huge tenet of his prime minister's tactics, but since many of the people ensnared in that corruption scandal were members of the close-knit council of support for the presidency of Erdogan, Erdogan put an instant stop to it. This is one of the major reasons that Erdogan has undermined Davutoglu's campaigning during the parliamentary elections lead-up. And now, not only has Erdogan spoiled the party for the AKP, but he's leaving Davutoglu to clean up the mess. Davutoglu, with so much pressure on his back, practically resigned. Well, at least he did this morning as part of a procedural move. A New York Times report from June 8th shows that it is required when the majority is not won for the prime minister to resign. The president then re-invokes the prime minister's leadership, giving them the task of developing a coalition government out of what the election results have given them. But this will be a very difficult task for Davutoglu, because the other strongest party, the National Movement of Turkey, which has enough of a majority to contribute to the AKP's rule and put together a coalition government, has expressively said that it doesn't want to join forces with the AKP because of the rule left by Erdogan. This means that Davutoglu has some serious politicking ahead of himself that he is certainly not prepared for. Whatever political scuttle emerges out of the next few weeks will certainly damage his reputation as a politician and put him in situations to form unescapable alliances. But Davutoglu is not the only loser. The second most important loser out of the Turkish parliamentary elections are international investors, because now there is great lack of certainty over the result. Immediately, we saw a tragic result. According to the Wall Street Journal on June 8th, the Istanbul stock index tumbled by 8%, the largest it has in the last fiscal year, mostly due to uncertainty over how the politics of the situation would progress forward. According to the Hurriyet Daily News, a Turkish newspaper, on June 7th, if Davutoglu and his party cannot form a coalition government with the other parties in parliament in the next 45 days, President Erdogan has the ability to call for new elections. These elections, however, would only be able to take place 90 days after that 45-day point, which essentially means that if a coalition cannot be formed by Davutoglu's unlikely characteristics, the Turkish government won't be able to have a solid parliament until 2016. This is troubling to investors because it means that the parliament will not be able to act on key pieces of legislation that are waiting for the new parliament in order to have any action. Pieces about direct foreign investment, regulations, and central bank policies are all at the crux of what makes Turkey a strong investment for international businessmen, and the huge uncertainty will only be prolonged if the government cannot be formed, making it very difficult for any of these businessmen to be comfortable about the way their assets in Turkey or their prospects of investing in the country might seem. But the number one loser out of all of these situations, other than the president, is the CHP, the Republican People's Party. This is the main opposition party to Erdogan's AKP. And it's weird. You would assume that the opposition party, when its main opponent is losing in the election, would benefit. But this is not exactly what has happened. A June 7th article from The Guardian explains that part of the reason that the CHP is now going to suffer is because of the success of the HDP. The HDP, representing a Kurdish minority, has in the past only run independent candidates, never as a formal party, because one of the kinks of the Turkish constitution is that if a party doesn't win more than 10% of the vote, it won't be able to get any seats in parliament. This was a strategic victory for the HDP because it was able to pass the 10% threshold. But it did that by drawing not only on Kurdish voters, but on secularists, environmentalists, and women, all of whom represent the constituency of the Republican People's Party, or CHP. This has meant that there has been a loss of seats in response to the CHP's rise. The CHP is struggling because now it sees the national movement as the kingmaker, the party in parliament that gets to decide whether the coalition government that Davutoglu is trying to form will actually work. And instead, even though its primary political rival and Erdogan's party is being in decline, this means that the CHP has not proven itself to take the voters that it looks after. According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, in a June 8th report, this casts serious doubt on the party's leadership because they could not capture the votes of secularists and environmentalists who since 2013 have been in adamant action against Erdogan. And those voters gravitated to the HDP because they saw emboldening that party as a better chance of derailing the AKP than supporting the very constituency that has been opposing the president. This loss of political momentum may be a crippling factor for the CHP and means that they don't control their own destiny in the upcoming parliament. These are the biggest three losers out of these Turkish parliamentary elections, and it shows that the political reverberations of one election go much deeper. The hope from Davutoglu to international investors to the CHP is that there won't be another election called in the next 45 days, because that could have even more disastrous aftershocks.